What's up, guys? Welcome back to Sons of Thunder. This is Chase and Andrew, and today we will be tackling the issue, the steadily waning issue, thankfully, of atheism. It's
Yes, very.
it's it's thankfully been on the decline for a few years now. We saw some very angry atheists there for a couple of years, especially online, but hopefully we're gonna put all that stuff past us. With
Yeah, I
this,
think.
actually, this video will end atheism, I think.
Oh yeah, 100%. No, honestly, I think the biggest thing that made a difference to the issue with atheism is the rise of Christian apologetics, and I think you see this in a lot of places where something becomes really like prominent and something becomes a big issue until the counter group gets the opportunity to swing back. And so for a while there in the early 2000s, you had the new atheist movement kind of dominated the internet. And it just took time for the Christian response to get its feet on the ground and get in the game. And once they did, I mean, I feel like it's been a kind of a slaughter. I mean, I'm not saying that every, issue has been fully handled and dealt with. But I just think in general, I feel like I don't see many atheist wins, in my personal opinion. I could be biased. That's always possible. But we're going to do our best over the next 3 episodes or so to cover all of these issues. And today we're starting on science. So we're gonna talk a little bit about the history of atheism, and then we're going to talk about science and how the atheist worldview has sort of they are trying to monopolize science, which is a revisionist history of the sciences.
For sure. Yeah. So, first of all, we would like to define atheism. So, there's 2 different definitions that most people will give you, but the standard and most widely accepted is a disbelief in the existence of God. So, the belief that God does not exist. Now, the second weaker, quote unquote, definition of atheism would be a lack of belief in God. Now, the first time I hadn't heard that before a few years ago. Not even a few. No. This has been within the past year that I first heard this. I don't know how long people have been using this term, but to me, saying that you lack a belief doesn't really make any difference. So all right. Let's break this down. So what they'll say is, well, we don't claim that there is no God definitively, right? We just don't confirm that he does exist. Now, I'm sure you can catch the problem there, because when asked if they believe that God exists, they will say no, and so then you say, well, then you're not just not confirming his existence; you actively don't think that he exists. So it's just kind of a turn of phrase, in my opinion. It doesn't really make any sense to me.
It almost feels like one is just accepting atheism, because I think there's the issue, like, you don't want to make a definitive statement. And so if you take the full on, I just don't believe in God, now you've made a definitive claim. So if you are like 75%, you just say, well, I just lack belief, right? Because it's like, you're not a full agnostic, but you're not a full atheist. I disagree with that. I think that's, I think you just need to make your definitive statement. If you want to not believe in God, that's fine. We can't force you to believe in God, but walking a fence line, just, take a definitive stance.
And the problem is, when pressed, they do take the definitive stance that he does not exist. So they'll argue like they're an atheist, but when it's convenient, they'll say, oh, no, I just lack belief. So, but
or you could change that for there's just a lack of evidence, or there's, if you could prove it to me, and often I think the Frank Turek response to that is always so good of, if I can give you definitive proof that God is real, would you believe it? And they're always like, no. Yeah, it's like, right. So the issue isn't about science or facts. It's an emotional issue. It's an issue that this is a response to something else.
Sure. Yeah. Now, atheism does differ from agnosticism. Agnosticism is the belief that there may or may not be a God. They just either they say that they do not know if God exists, or that the existence of God is unknowable. So that's agnosticism. Atheism is the active stance that God does not exist, and so that is defining atheism. So really, modern atheism, and not even new atheism, just modern atheistic thought in general, kind of came out of the Enlightenment period. So between the 17 and 1800s. It saw a major uptick in atheistic sentiments such as secularism, and it was really the first era to see an open discussion on atheism, because largely before that, there was anti-atheist sentiment that would often result in like persecution from sources such as the church or, Islam, different things like that. These different religious groups would persecute people who not just were atheists, but who did, actively disagreed with them. So that's kind of what kept atheism private. But by, late 1700s, it was becoming a much more prevalent topic of discussion, especially with the rise of secularism. And then the 19th century is where we really come into our own with atheism. The 19th century saw secularism grow tremendously with figures such as like Karl Marx, and these quote unquote pioneers of atheism openly challenged religion. It wasn't really just a discussion anymore. It was like an actual like knockdown, drag out fight. These people did not just not believe in God. They didn't want to believe in God. They had a very atheistic agenda that they were trying to push. And so
you start to see the birth of the evangelical atheist,
right.
the push to evangelize to everyone, that there is no God for whatever reason they find that to be a more freeing reality, that death leads to nothing. And there's nothing, there's no positive ending to this, there's no hope at the end. There's nothing to look forward to. And that now is the reality that you want to free people into. And I've met several who would claim that they either have been in the past or are currently evangelical atheists, in the sense of they go and they tell the world that, and they combat people online and they fight with everyone that they know that God is not real. And again, I've just really struggled with that idea, because to me, I just feel like atheism in my mind is more like it fits in a box of individualism. Like, it's not a worldview that has a reason to garner more followers. There's not a reason in secularism to try and get as many people as you can. Like the Christian worldview is this, we want to see people saved because we want people in heaven. Like we want people in the new creation. We want people to come to Christ and to experience the love that he has for them, and to have, joy and hope and peace in this life. With atheism, I don't really see what the end goal or desire is to evangelize secularism to other people. Like, again, even if it's, well, you get to live whatever way you want, and there's no deity telling you how to live your life by some archaic set of rules. again, I think there's ample evidence to support that the idea of living with no restraints and living the way you want and the way you desire has major negative outcomes. I think that we see that all the time with people who end up in addiction, with people who end up oppressed, not by almost their own psyche. Their own hubris has oppressed them because it's all based on what I want to do, what I want to achieve. And it's depressing. And so many people go into extreme nihilism because you only can walk a fine line in secularism kind of if you live in a consumeristic mindset where you can fill the gap of God with things. Because if you are like philosophically dissecting secularism, there is no light at the end of the tunnel, which drives one into nihilism. So I'll let you get back to the history part, but I've just never understood the combative atheist movement, where it suddenly became this thing to strive for, to push people out of faith. Because at the end of the day, even if we're wrong, at the end of the day, like, we tried to make the world better, and we tried, loving people and growing in our faith to this deity who maybe ends up at the end we're wrong, and we will never know. I just don't get it. I've never understood it, but anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. Case in point, the atheist has no reason to evangelize. Obviously, with Karl Marx and Charles Darwin came the rise of both secularism and naturalism. The idea that, so secularism being the idea that religion is useless for modern times or times at all, and that the only rule for government and ethics should be either popularity or, a higher person to decide those things. And then naturalism being the idea that the only things that exist and are clear and have any sort of effect on anything at all is just biology, chemistry, and physics, the sciences. That those are the only determining factors for anything. That's naturalism. And, in the 20th century, atheism became a very widespread worldview, not just because of evangelism, because most people in the 20th century weren't just becoming atheists by droves. A lot of it was state-mandated atheism. We see that in communist Russia and China, and we even today see that in North Korea, and it's obviously very strongly recommended in China. But then the eclipse of the 20th century and the dawn of the 21st century saw a major change in the atheistic movement with authors such as Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and his ilk. Those guys wrote so there's four of them. Sorry, there's one guy I can't remember, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and Christopher Hitchens. They wrote 4 books in the span of about 4 years that gave rise to this new atheism, is what they called it. These 4 books were called the 4 Horsemen of the New Atheism. And basically they just outlined why they think it wasn't even just like atheism, it was straight up propaganda. Like they just thought religion was stupid and how Christians were idiots. Like they were just going after people. So it was weird. And that convinced a lot of people to stop believing in God because these people were well educated and they sort of used their education as a cudgel to beat atheism into a lot of impressionable young adults at the time. So that happened. That was in the mid 2000s, and then it kind of went over into the to the teens, but really it kind of died out there at the end of the 20 teens.
Well,
But
and
we
we
still
also
kind of have the after effects of that now.
yeah, and in the midst of that, you had Zeitgeist,
Yes.
which was again we've talked about that in a previous podcast when we were talking our episode on was Jesus God, or no, we did that on Who is Jesus.
Yeah, Who is Jesus?
Where we talked a lot about Zeitgeist and the effect that that had on, the millennial generation, which I think still is the highest like movement away from the church was the millennial generation. And so I know, that was in the rise of the internet, the rise of the new atheist movement, and the height of the Zeitgeist frenzy that, sent shockwaves. And like I said earlier, the new atheist movement came out swinging in the 2000s, and it just took time for the Christian apologists to catch up because it was not a threat that they were prepared for. And now I think we've seen, because of the internet at the same time, we've seen a huge swing back, into, Gen Z has a much higher rate of being, I would say theism, not necessarily all Christian, but Gen Z in general is more open to the idea of God than the millennial generation before them. And now who knows if that'll carry into Gen Alpha as it's coming up, but likely that is going to be a continuing trend, we hope. But yeah, Zeitgeist it's a stupid movie. If you go watch it, it's not a good movie, but yeah, it had a huge impact at the same time as those books had a huge impact and the internet had a huge impact. But now into the 2010s where we are now.
Sorry.
Sorry, we're in the 20s. I forget where we are not in the 10s.
Where? So there was Zeitgeist, yes, and then there was the 2008 documentary Religious by Bill Maher.
Oh yeah,
Maher is just not a good person. He's just very mean all the time, and he demonstrated that quality very well in his movie Religious, in which he was very unkind to a lot of religious people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was not cool. But Bill Maher was also kind of one of the heads of the new atheist movement, not necessarily actively involved in it, but not that he wasn't actively involved, not necessarily that he was going out and debating, but he was a popular person who was also an atheist, still is an atheist. And so he came out with that movie Religious, which again espoused a lot of the same things as the Zeitgeist movie. But that really kind of kicked things off, and that leads us up until now. Now the atheistic movement, like we said, has been largely on the decline, particularly thanks to Christian apologetics in this field, thanks to the GOAT John Lennox, along with Dr. William Lane Craig, David Wood, a lot of these guys who went out and started swinging back. So,
yeah. And now we move into atheism and science. So we're going to get into what I said earlier was atheism has made some pretty bold claims, and has kind of this idea of monopolizing science, that science, it cannot be backed by a religious person or a Christian, which is false. It's not just false, it's historically inaccurate. And we're going to go over some of the popular atheist arguments from science and why they are either baseless or wrong or just misinformed. And so they have, again, largely called this their trump card, right? I know people who actively say, well, I don't believe in God, I believe in science. And this idea, I remember growing up that this idea that science just did not sit with God, and that I could not be somebody who agreed with science if I agreed with religion. And I had friends who struggled with this pretty heavily. And so growing up, in public education, it was like a war every day, and in my testimony, I don't really feel like I really, gave my life to Christ until I was about 19, but I was still I was a cultural Christian. And so I was still debating people as a kid the best I could on these, you know, ridiculous scientific positions that when you argue a position from the religious side, it's almost like they just don't take you seriously. And I'll have one about this God of the Gaps thing that I'll explain and how they just brush it off. But so jumping ahead, so here's some of the most popular arguments. The first one is God of the Gaps, and it talks about how in the past people would often use God as a means of explaining things they couldn't comprehend. Right. So an example would be Zeus and lightning. Right. So now, as time has gone on, we have figured out natural causes of certain phenomena in the world, right? Like lightning. And we don't need gods anymore to explain why these certain things happen. And so the problem is with that theory is that you also still have things that science cannot explain, right? But kind of to phrase this real quick. So the way the argument breaks down is, so God is used to explain things, but now we have an explanation to things. Well, now all things have an explanation, right? And that means we don't need God. And I think that this is it's a naturalism argument, right? Everything has a natural cause. Everything can be explained through nature. And then the things that haven't been solved through nature yet, we just would argue, oh, well, they will, right? If majority of things have been argued through the naturalistic perspective, then at some point we will figure out a natural response to everything. There's no reason to think anything could be supernatural, to think anything has some type of unexplainable nature. It's just not possible. My biggest issue with the God of the Gaps really is it doesn't explain how the thing came into existence, right? So it's still, naturalism does not explain creation at all. And okay, so you've explained to me how lightning happens, and there's a naturalistic answer for how we get lightning. That's great. That doesn't explain what set those natural things in motion to behave that way. And this idea that evolution over time created these events, or that is not a solid answer. The Christian perspective comes at it from an angle where we say, well, we believe that a creator, a God, organized all these natural things to react in a certain way that created the event. And then like the human body, like DNA in the human body is a written language. And we believe that God used a language to create physical matter. Like we're not saying that DNA isn't natural. It is. It's a natural thing in the natural world. But we're saying a God created the natural. And so we have an answer for how these things came to be, that God set this world in motion and is actively participating in it. That doesn't, again, I can agree. Yes, there is a natural answer for how lightning happens. And I can also say, and God made all of those things work for it to happen. You know what I mean? And so I've never understood the God of the Gaps because it still leaves a gap. There's still gaps in the science because we have things that naturalism cannot explain. But at the same time, it also has gaps because it's not handling the issue of creation, which is the ultimate, naturalist hurdle, is this idea that, which Chase is about to get into, but this idea that nothing created everything. The idea that we all came from this primordial soup, that just two atoms hit each other one day and exploded, and everything came from that. It's just an unbelievable set of circumstances to get to this place right now through naturalism.
Yeah, like Andrew said, the argument actually flips on the atheism by saying, or on the atheist, because there are certain things that science cannot explain. And when asked, atheists will often say that, well, we will explain it with science one day. It's like, oh, okay, well, what people used to do, this isn't even what I would do. Like, if you're like, if you ask me a question that science can't answer, I don't, maybe the Lord just does that. Maybe there's a natural explanation for it. I don't have to tell you. Like, it's not as though I'm just going to say, oh, well, yep, that's God. What, schizophrenia? Oh yeah, demons. It's like, no, that's not, like, I don't have to say that. Here's the problem. When asked, the atheist will always give the answer that that's just how it works, right? So, like, you'll say, okay, well, lightning is caused by certain electrons that get real excited in the sky, and whenever they finally have a path that goes all the way down to the ground, whatever, I don't actually know all that much about lightning, boom, it happens. You're like, oh, okay, but how? Oh, well, that's just how it works. Oh, okay. So
that's just the way it is.
Right, like, oh, okay, so what causes a plant to grow? Oh, well, water and minerals and stuff go in through the roots and they nourish the system, and you're like, oh, okay. Well, how? That's just how it works. Oh, okay. So you can't explain why am I stuck to the floor right now? Oh, because of gravity. Oh, okay. So how does gravity work? Well, whenever there's a mass that's so big, it everything has its own gravity, but when it's so big, then it has a really, really big gravitational pull and field, and it allows, even large things like us to stick even when we're trying to get away. Oh, okay. How? That's just how it works.
It's just how it
exactly.
is. And we know we're dumbing things down a little bit, but at the core of it, this is what we're talking about, is that naturalism only gets you so far before you still have to ask the question, how did that system come to be? Because that is a system that exists because of it has a reason. I want to say it has a creator. Somebody, like, a system doesn't just come into being on its own. But almost all things in nature survive off of a system of events that happen, right? Like human beings, we eat food and we drink water, and those things fuel our bodies in a certain way that keeps us moving. It keeps us going, and it fills us, and then we get rid of the waste, right? And if we didn't, it would poison us, and because our body burns all of that in stomach acid, and it has to go somewhere. That is a system that exists to fuel people the way we have to have sleep. I mean, why did we not evolve out of sleep? Sleep's inefficient and ineffective. And if evolution creates more efficient and effective creatures over time, then why have we not abandoned that? That's just because we just like it. Okay. In the same way, like, different plants have systems to keep them alive. And again, over naturalistic courses, how does something have life to begin with and then create its own system? Like, the original thing comes into being, and then you're going to tell me that over, billions of years, it created these naturalistic systems to stay alive. How did it stay alive to begin with? I just think that if you keep taking things back to the source, you're going to find an issue with naturalism. It's just not going to have the answers you're looking for.
True. Yeah, naturalism cannot explain everything. And it wasn't meant to, right? The Lord didn't exactly design everything in nature to be readily availably explained. Like, there's a reason it took a really long time for us in human history to understand some of these things, because it's like, it's not as though you could just look at that and say, oh, yeah, that's why. It's like, okay, well, there's reasons, and they're very complex reasons why things work, and you would expect that. But that's a different matter. So, the Big Bang. Everybody and their mother knows about the Big Bang. Everybody, especially if you're in America, if you're in an Islamic country, you probably don't even know about the Big Bang. You probably, anyways, yeah, state does not sanction Big Bang over there, but the hypothesis of the Big Bang states that at the beginning of time, nothing exploded into everything. And you'll get different answers based on who you ask, which atheist. I think Dawkins said that because the law of gravity exists, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Baseless claim that has nothing to do with anything.
So gravity existed gravity was the ultimate pre-existence. It existed before anything else as a law. It was an established law before creation. How does that make
Talk
sense?
to him.
No, I mean, genuinely, that is very confusing. How is that possible? That is the argument in atheism that natural law existed before nature existed. So before space came into being, before we had stars, before we had anything in space, there's nothing. There is a void of nothingness. We still had laws? Because how can you explain laws outside of nature? That doesn't make any sense. Maybe I'm an idiot. I mean, maybe somebody who is way smarter than me in the comments is going to come in and explain, because so far our comments love to argue with us. But we'll see. Yeah. Somebody can come in and explain how laws existed pre-existence, but that doesn't make any sense. I guess maybe you could argue
I can see how laws could exist before for them to govern existed, but like, again, you have to explain how. Okay, sure, those laws existed. How did that create everything? Like, why? And also, those laws act within time. So yeah, time has always existed.
I guess to me, like the laws of nature to me are abstract because.
Oh yeah.
Essentially we created those. They exist outside of our understanding and thought, but we put a name on it. But that's almost like it's like the Force. I mean, that's like, oh, well, there's laws of nature and they guide and govern the functions of the universe. It's like, that's just spiritualism. That's spiritualism within secularism. You're just looking for answers to things that you don't want to accept. You don't want to accept that something set things in motion, so you just call it a law and say, "Oh, well, there's laws that govern and guide us, and we can't break these laws. It's literally impossible." Well, that just sounds like a god. I mean, the answer is you're looking for is a god. You just don't want to give it sentience. So I don't know. I'm getting worked up. And again, we don't have anybody here to argue their case. So I don't want to just because somebody could totally prove me wrong. But to me, that does not make sense. The law comes from the existence. So if you're saying that the laws of gravity, since no matter what would trigger existence, you're arguing a sense of pre-existent law to explain how the universe could come into creation after. But again, we're at the core of it, the explanation is that nothing produced everything. Nothing means nothing. There was nothing there. Because you still haven't answered, where did that law come from? If the law made it happen, where did it come from? How did that happen? No. Whatever. I don't get it, but it's fine.
True. Yeah.
I'm just ranting at this point, so just, yeah.
That's okay. But essentially what they'll say is that, well, the universe has a natural history that could be traced back to a single point, and they would say at that point is the Big Bang. And there is no evidence in traceable history all the way back to the beginning that points to divine intervention. Now, obviously that's not true. There is, in fact, empirical evidence. There is no there is no empirical evidence that states that everything comes from nothing or that things come out of nothing. So I think that is indeed empirical evidence against the idea that nothing created everything. But one of the things that I really wanted to talk about is the fact that atheists will cite Occam's razor to try to explain the universe in the simplest way possible. If you're unfamiliar with what Occam's razor is, Occam's razor states that there is no reason to multiply assumptions, so that basically what that means is that they're, I guess, simply broken down. It is that the simplest answer is generally the best answer. And so we can see that, I mean, it's pretty self-evident. A lot of the times the simplest answer is the best answer. But so it's actually that you should not multiply assumptions, right? Occam's razor does not mean that you just get to throw out particular details of an equation or of an issue in favor of selecting a simpler answer. So you can't just say, oh man, Andrew, I'm so glad that you joined me on Discord. I can't believe that the wind moved your mouse in such a fashion that it double clicked on the Discord icon on your desktop and then went and moved to our channel and clicked on it and then clicked on the voice and then click, like, is it simple to say that the wind did that? It is, in a way, very simple to say that the wind did that. Does it make sense? No, it does not make sense, right? Yeah. So Occam's razor isn't the idea that the simplest answer is always the correct answer. It is that you should not assume more than is reasonable to assume. So I'll give you an example. If I say, Andrew, I'm next to my dog right now, and someone were to ask you, say, Andrew, is Chase in the dog kennel or is he in his office? Well, Andrew can clearly see through the camera that I'm in my office. And from deductive reasoning, you could probably think that, well, Chase probably couldn't fit in a dog kennel. So I'd have to say that Chase is probably in his office. The person will say, well, yeah, but Chase says that he's next to his dog, and dogs are usually in kennels or near kennels. Wouldn't it make more sense for you to say that he's in a dog kennel? Again, it is simpler to say that I am in a dog kennel in one aspect. It's simpler if you only knew that I was near a dog. But the problem is that I can't fit in a dog kennel, and I'm not in a dog kennel. I'm in my office, and you can see that. And so, while yes, it is very simplistic to say that I'm in a dog kennel, that's not the right answer, and it should not be taken seriously. And so that's the same thing with the Big Bang. You could say, oh, well, yeah, well, the universe just came into existence. That's just how it happened. There is no God. While, yes, that is a simple answer, it does not account for all of the evidence. Okay, well, what about the fact that things don't just appear out of nothing? What about the fact that all of the evidence that we have suggests that consciousness did not develop naturally? What about all the evidence that we have that DNA is a real language that was actually set in motion by a real God? What about the evidence that it is virtually impossible for abiogenesis to occur, or the fact that living things came from non-living things? What about the fact that evolution is statistically impossible? Like, there's all of this evidence that we have to support theism, while it is simple to say that nothing created everything, that doesn't make it the right answer. So Occam's razor does not apply in their understanding of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Simplicity also, just for simplicity's sake, is, again, it's just I don't want to call it a dumb argument, but I just think that when you're trying to oversimplify everything to get out of the conversation of God, it kind of feels like what they accuse Christians of is, oh, the Christians are just, they're taking the simple way out and saying, oh, God created everything, right? Like, oh, and I'm not going to say that there's never been a Christian who has said, oh, well, God did it. And then they just, don't care to know anything else. But again, both sides can be, One side doesn't want to, learn about the natural way that God used to create everything. That they're okay with just saying, yeah, God created it. God did it. And that, okay, that's their prerogative. And in the same way, the other side is now then bashes the Christian, or then the Christian just bashes, it just gunning for simple answers is not always the best option. That's all. That like Chase just gave such a great explanation to. It doesn't always work.
No, it does not.
Oh, all right. The multiverse theory, again. So essentially it's, well, how do we know this is the only universe? How do we know that every little action we do, but we could have done, spawns in another universe? Like, what if I chose to wear a white shirt today? What if I'd chosen to wear a red shirt? Well, then what if that changed everything? And then now there's a whole other universe that it has started because I chose to actually wear a red shirt. And if multiple universes exist, there's a higher likelihood that one produces the exact conditions for sentient and conscious life, right? So basically, if you take it all the way back to the beginning, so you have the Big Bang, you have this moment of everything erupts, and then the potential options to start shooting out is that there's multiple kinds of universes, multiple kinds of offshoots. And because there's so many universes, one eventually led to life because they just kept trying and trying and trying over and over and over again, just branching out from, like a would you rather novel. And, they have multiple endings and destinations. Choose your own adventure, but that's like of the universe. It's a choose your own adventure, and there are no, false outcomes. The problem is, there's so many problems with the multiverse theory. But the number one is that's not living in reality. You're working off suspicion. You're not working off of what's actually in front of you and true reality. We don't need to debate about whether or not sentient life happened because it happened, right? We don't have to debate, well, what if there's a universe that doesn't have sentient life? We have no evidence to support that. We have zero evidence to support that another universe exists where the set of circumstances did not happen and there's not sentient life. We need to debate about reality, not about suspicion of some alternate reality that could exist. Because we have no evidence to support that it does. And again, how did those universes get there? Go back to that initial domino that fell, that spawned all the universes. What set that into motion? And to me, this is an argument that I think is very easy to form when you're young, because you're constantly living in doubt and you're living in this like, oh, well, what if I would have done this? What if I would have done that? And then you start to think and fantasize over like the way your whole day could have gone differently if you had just made a different decision. But just because you in your mind can put together a reality, first off, that is not realistic. It's your own brain creating the way things could have gone. It's delusion. It's not real. None of that is real. Just because your mind can create that doesn't mean it exists. It doesn't exist. You're not living in reality. You're living in a manufactured reality that you created. Just because you can create it doesn't mean it exists. The amount of books, the amount of fiction and fantasy books that exist in this world, those worlds are only existing on the pages that they're written on. They don't exist outside of those pages. They're not real. It's all fantasy. It's all make-believe. It's delusion. It's not what's happening in reality. And so we can't argue this idea of, well, what if I had done this? Well, you did what you did. You already did it. It's done. It's in the past. You only live in the present. You are only alive in the present moment with which you exist. You're not alive in the future. You're not alive in the past. You're alive in the present moment. So you can't have made two decisions in the present because each second comes and goes. So in that 1 second you were alive, you made a decision. You can't just reverse time and, oh, well, in that split second, I made a second decision. No, you didn't. You made your one decision. That's it. There's only one reality, only one existence. So no, multiverse theory is stupid. I got passionate there because I've talked to people about this before. It makes no sense. The further you think about it, reality doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. What would trigger essentially your body to split in 2 seconds and you make two decisions? Well, who controls that? Who controls that possible happening? Who controls that in the very beginning, multiple realities started at once and then they all just, no, it doesn't make sense. And again, if somebody wants to come in and argue that there's some evidence of some alternate existence or reality, I have yet to see any convincing evidence that another reality exists. You know, I'm like, is there convincing conspiracy that another reality exists or something that, again, deals with things that aren't actually real, that they're fun to talk about, but they're not based in reality? Yeah. But when you dive into what is actually real, what is true, what is actually being studied, that does not exist and it's not possible. End of my rant.
Yeah.
Done.
And many atheists will posit that there is a multiverse generator that is just constantly pumping out universes. But the problem is that just replaces God, right?
Exactly.
What is the
evidence?
multiverse generator?
What evidence?
What is it? How does it work? Why does it do what it does? And even if you could prove to me that a multiverse generator does exist, the multiverse generator had to have had a creator. So you know,
something complex enough to produce whole universes. Where would that? How could you believe in that naturally happening more than God?
Yeah,
that's unbelievably that is like, you know, the whole thing of I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. That is unbelievable faith to think that just occurred in natural reality. Great.
Yeah. So the next topic we'll be discussing is evolution and abiogenesis. So the definition of evolution, otherwise known as macroevolution, is the idea that all life forms came into existence as species based on smaller, or not even necessarily smaller, but different life forms that were more simple. So we get the idea that, like, you know, we were once monkeys who were then like smooth alligators, who were then fish, who were then simple single-celled organisms. And that all species of life came from these single-celled organisms. That's the idea of macroevolution. And then abiogenesis is the the theory that states that all living things came into existence from non-life. So, for example, like a pencil becoming a canary. That's not, you know, that's obviously an oversimplification, but non-life to life. That's what they would say. And the atheist would posit that, well, if abiogenesis is true and nothing, and non-life can assemble itself into life, and if macroevolution is true and that life can subsequently diversify into more complex organisms, then we don't need to invoke the existence of God to explain the complexity and diversity of life on the planet. The atheist will often point to the fact that these two hypotheses are generally agreed upon, which is not true either. But they would say that, well, you know, this is what scientists say. Scientists say that you know, that this is true and that they can explain some of the evidence for us. But, you know, obviously, just because something is generally agreed upon does not make it true. And the hypothesis of both abiogenesis and evolution ignore large swaths of both your logical and rational mind, and also of the statistics of probability. It make it completely nonsensical. For instance, the probability of a minimal genome, so a minimal set of genetic information needed to create a simple life form, single-celled organism, the probability of a minimal genome self-assembling through naturalistic processes is less than 1 in the 200, in less than 1 in 10 to the 200th power. Now, put that into perspective for you, even by our most liberal estimates of some 17, 18 billion years of the universe's history, there have only been about, it's like 1 in 10 to the 17 seconds. So not even close to the even number of seconds. Let's actually make sure that's true. So that's going to take a while. Never mind. I don't want to do that. A long time, many different seconds, but not even coming anywhere close to 1 in 10 to the 200. And even if there were that many seconds, that doesn't mean that genomes were just sitting around self-assembling, willy-nilly. So that's, even based on observed chemical restraints, and even granting that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, that is not long enough for that probability to be within reason. It's also absurd to suggest that evolution can account for the diversity of life, because the genome of a particular creature would not only have to develop a new part. So let's say, hey, we believe that dinosaurs evolved or devolved, depending on how you look at it, into birds. So, okay, well, that means that this dinosaur would have had to have evolved a wing. Actually, 2 wings. Oh, okay. So the dinosaur evolved wings, but it didn't just evolve wings. It has to have feathers. It has to have hollow bones. It has to have air sacs. It has to have a lot of these different, very important supporting features to make up that one simple, evolutionary divergence. In fact, the probability of a new functional gene developing via random natural mutations is about 1 in 10 to the 600. So very slim pickings when it comes to life developing out of non-life, and then that life subsequently developing into humans, toucans, elephants, chimpanzees, right? We don't see that.
Yeah, no.
And that's not something that we can really test either. People often point to the fossil records and say, look, it appears as though humans had simpler forms or different things like that. And while, again, I'm not suggesting that evolution is incompatible with theism, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because there is no possible way, like we just discussed, for life to come from non-life. And so it wouldn't make any sense to say that, well, then then nothing can lead to humans. I just don't see that, especially the fossil record argument. There are very significant gaps in the fossil record. Can't exactly see how Chase was once, a chimp. And then how we get to the fish is ambiguous at best, completely unattested to at most. And then, and also the fossil record is extremely, how you say, not just inconclusive, but like impotent in certain ways. Because, for instance, not everything that dies becomes a fossil. So it's not like we can always track everything with the fossil record, because we always know that this certain thing died and looked like this. And like we can't We can't account for that. What we can account for is what you'd expect in theism to be random explosions of certain forms of life in certain areas at certain times. That's what we can find. And I feel like that really does support the days of creation, but we'll leave that one up to you all. I don't know where you guys stand on that one, but it is definitely not logical or rational or probable to say that all forms of life came from non-life at one time, even given the perfect situation. Can't happen.
No. All right. So our next argument is on neuroscience and psychology. So this is kind of dealing with, not kind of, this is dealing with the idea that man created God, right? So basically our consciousness is natural, and then we utilized our consciousness to create God, to explain the things we couldn't explain, which kind of falls back into the God of the gaps. But we're going to talk about how, so essentially your brain activity can explain many things about how, human experience, such as like emotion, thought, and personality. And so, that's all based on brain activity, right? And then religious experiences can be based on brain activity, right? So the way that the music makes you feel, or the way that prayer makes you feel, or being prayed over makes you feel, or when you read something in the Bible that you connect with, and how that triggers these moments in your brain, and it releases certain chemicals. And so these things can be explained naturally. They can be explained by the way that your brain functions, and not by any form of divine intervention. And so, thus, there is no need to say that consciousness is evidence of God, right? It's just that it's a result of biological processes. No. So so some of these things are obviously true, right? Like, obviously, and I hate saying it this way, but there is a goal of contemporary Christian music. I mean, not even just contemporary Christian music, but hymns too. Like, hymns had goals. There was an agenda based on the music, right? It's specifically religious for a purpose, and it's trying to evoke your emotion. That is the goal, especially more so in contemporary Christian music. It's trying to evoke your emotions. And so it's made in a way to do that. That doesn't always mean it's bad, right? That doesn't mean it's a bad thing to draw out your emotions. But just because that exists is not an explanation of where consciousness came from. Just because the way we interact with the supernatural or the divine can be explained by processes in the brain doesn't explain how those processes came into existence. I would actually argue, when you're talking about where something came from, and how something was created, and how it's difficult to explain, the human brain being a naturally developing thing is maybe the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I don't know how you can possibly say that the human brain is a process of evolution. And again, especially the idea of a consciousness forming, where we go from a sentient being to like a sentient being with morals, is almost unreasonable to say that could be a natural process. So again, it does not explain the ability of mankind to understand, make decisions based on these extremely complex informations, right? Like that doesn't make sense. And so we can agree humanity is far above any other life. And when it comes to intelligence and self-awareness and spiritual thought, human beings are far superior. We're not going to see pretty much any of those things in non-human life. And honestly, again, the theist would draw to the conclusion that this is something special. There's something unique about people. People were created differently than animals for some reason. I hear this one all the time, that it's in every comment section on every atheist video I find is God didn't create us. We created God. Like that's like the mic drop. You know, like no Christian has ever heard this before, and this is going to be the thing that gets them to walk away from their faith. No. That doesn't, you're not getting back to the source. We said that almost about all of these is at the source. How is that possible? And I truly cannot fathom how naturalistic sources and these secularistic claims could possibly lead to the human brain, let alone like the human eye. But the human brain makes even less. It makes no sense. So,
or the brain of the animal. That doesn't make sense either.
You know,
Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. The brain is such a complex thing that I could. But when you're talking about animals who can make like simple functions and they can do things in a simple manner without, you know, there's no right or wrong in a decision making process based on like the consideration. Yeah, it's based on instinct, but not the consideration of how it affects the whole or how it affects other people around you, or there's no societal expectations outside of survival, right? Like, I guess I could understand in a sense how you could maybe naturally get to a creature that could get to those responses. But when you start to have deep, intelligent thought about the way that your actions interact with others and the way that those have consequences, and like the idea that you can use your brain to create fake realities like we just talked about earlier, no, that does not compute. Art in itself, it doesn't even, there's no, again, in the idea of a fully evolved world, there's no reason for art to exist or beauty to exist, or why do we make our food taste good? That doesn't, if we were just based on survival, there's no reason to have joy in anything. We should just eat to live, right? Like get purely the most efficient form of fuel in our body. But yet we do love our food and we try to make it taste really good. And we're, you know, and we love art and we love to create. And even though, like, I don't mean this in art doesn't have value. Art does have value. The problem is the value of art is only to the conscious mind. Art only has value to the beholder who can think on what it is, and it causes them to have like a deeper understanding of the world. Art has no value outside of a conscious being. It just doesn't. It exists merely as of itself. So there are things that don't make sense in a naturalist worldview. That why did we get here at all? Why do we do what we do? Because it doesn't make sense out of just, oh, well, we like to do it. Okay. That's not really a great answer. That I enjoy doing something. And there's plenty of things that I enjoy, or not just like me in general, but humans have enjoyed throughout the centuries that aren't good and aren't profitable and don't lead to survival and lead to the, expanding of our society. So I just, anyways.
Yeah. The another thing in particular is that the idea that anything is simple is absurd. Nothing is simple. There is no such thing as the simple atom, or the simple proton, or the simple cell. Right? None of these things are simple. They're all very complex, and they all have very different functions. And so even to say that, oh man, whenever if I understand that whenever I take this pencil and I throw it across the room and it hits the teacher in the face, then I'm gonna get a write-up or whatever. Is that simple? Sure. But at the same time, it's really not simple. I'm utilizing the laws of physics and of my human brain and all these different things to do these things that you consider to be a very simple action of throwing the pen, but it's actually very complex if you really look at it. So there's that. the next argument that atheists love to use is the argument of divine hiddenness. So this has the idea that if God truly does exist and is interacting with the world, then there should be consistent and detectable evidence. However, controlled studies show no evidence of divine intervention. Um, I don't know what kind of controlled studies these atheists would like to cite for divine intervention. That seems kind of silly to me. I think that a lot of them will say, like testing the effect of prayer, things like that. That doesn't really make any sense. You can't really test that. I mean, not to say that you can't test that. You can test that, but it's not as though God is at your beck and call to do what you would have for him to do. Like I'm not, if I'm an atheist and I'm talking to a Christian friend of mine, and I'm like, oh yeah, well, if your phone starts ringing with a phone call from your dad right now, God exists. Oh well, didn't happen. God doesn't exist. Like, that's not how it works.
Or even if it did happen, then they would say, oh well, I mean, that your dad he probably always calls you at this time. I've had someone before. No, they told me, I prayed that God would save my loved one, and if he did, I would believe in him. And it happened. But then they said, no, God didn't save my loved one. The doctors saved my loved one. So it's like, so you don't think that God works through naturalistic causes? So God can only be supernatural? God cannot be working within the natural that he's created? That doesn't make any sense. You're looking for a way out. So even if you ask to see something unexplainable, or you ask for these ridiculous one-offs of, God, if you make the lights flicker in this house right now, I'll believe in you. Then the lights flicker. Oh, well, it's raining right now, so it was probably just a power outage. It's so you can't use that. And also what you were saying, I liked it's not just that God's just not at your beck and call. It's that because God is, he is sentient. He is his own. He gets to make all decisions. He's sovereign. He makes his own choices. Okay, so if you do a test run of the effectiveness of prayer, well, God is also at the decision-making position where he can say, okay, since you're testing me right now, I'm not going to give you what you're asking for. He gets to choose. So if he knows what your whole intention is, so he can choose to say, okay, I'm going to answer all of these prayers to show you how wrong you are. Or he can also say, no, I don't do that. Because, like what Jesus said, like this wicked and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but there will be no sign given to it except the sign of Moses, right? They wanted the supernatural. They wanted to see these. What did I say?
Moses.
Did I say Moses? Oh, I can't believe I said that. Yes, Jonah. Thank you.
Okay.
No sign will be given to them except the sign of Jonah. Wow. But they were looking for that supernatural. They wanted these crazy wonders and signs, but they ignored the wonders and signs they'd already gotten. It didn't matter that they had already seen wonders and signs. They wanted more because they cared more about the show than they cared about the truth. So at the core of it, God is allowed to say, oh, you're doing this for a study? You're not going to see anything. And at the same time, he's allowed to say, yeah, I'll show you what you want to see. And at the core of it, there's going to be people who still reject him. There's going to be people who still say, no, there's still a naturalistic answer to that. Whatever. I think it's silly.
Well, and, the fact that there is anything for you to study, or that you exist, or that there is a study at all, or that studying exists, or that knowledge exists. Again, you gotta explain that, atheist. Like, you can't just assume these things. These are not assumptions that we can make, because we've already shown that it's irrational and illogical to believe that we came from non-life.
Yeah.
So how much more irrational is it to say that everything came from literally non? So that's, pretty unlikely. And I would also like to say that the argument of divine hiddenness is just not true, because the Lord is not hid. The Lord is readily accessible to those who are ready and willing to accept him. If you're like Saul, then if you're like Saul, David's father-in-law, Saul, if you're like him and you're trying to seek after the Lord, oh, play for me, David, or do some of this stuff, the Lord's just like, come on, dude, you don't love me, none of that stuff. You don't want a relationship with me. I'm not going to force myself on you. Get out of here. Or you could be like his son Jonathan and say, surely this is the Lord's anointed. And say, man, I see God's leading. I'm going to do it. And whenever the Lord gives you something, like Jonathan was given faith, or like Jonathan exercised the faith he was given, or like he won that victory in 1 Samuel 14 on the hill against those Philistines, right? Like, it's about, do you want him or not? The Lord is not hidden to those who want him, and he actually does actively disguise himself sometimes from people who don't want him, but pretend they do. And that is the unfortunate reality. But about 2,000 years ago, the divine actually became flesh. And he was not very hidden at that time. And he came down and he lived a perfect life for about 33 years and was crucified on a cross just for our sins. So explain exactly to me how hidden that is.
And then documented it.
Yeah. And then had other people write about it.
Yeah. No, no, not hidden. Readily available to those who are truly and earnestly seeking him, not seeking him to either argue with him or discredit him or tell him that he did a bad job designing the world. So naturalism can be tested. Supernaturalism cannot. So science works by assuming events have natural causes, and that can be tested. This approach has been extraordinarily successful in predicting and controlling the world, because supernatural claims can't be tested in the same way. They fall outside the most reliable way we gain knowledge. So first, yes, supernatural claims can be tested, such as prophecy and scientific claims in the Bible. They can be tested. Secondly, the fact that there is anything to test or a person to test them is evidence of the unmoved mover. We're hammering on this one because, again, none of these arguments get to the root. There's not a single argument that gets to the root of where did it come from? Where did your conscious mind come from to be able to even test something in the first place? You don't have an answer. You don't have a good answer. Third, since naturalism can be tested, it can also be tested and proven wrong. One such test is one that we have already talked about, but it's the test of probability of abiogenesis in evolution. It is absurd to say that all tests always lead to a naturalistic answer. I think that is perfectly conclusive. So yeah, I have nothing more to add on that, but yes. Now, Chase wants to move us into our rebuttal. So theism and science.
Yeah, so that was the arguments that atheists will use against theists, in particular Christians, when it comes to the existence of God. Now, shifting to theism and science, I'll be really honest with you. Theism obviously has a much better grasp on science because we believe that, because God is logical and rational, that there will be logic, and consistency in his creation. And that's exactly what we see. Not only that, but we know that God is infinitely complex, so we do expect to find some level of complexity in nature. And lo and behold, we find that. So the first The first thing that we like to talk about when it comes to the theistic evidence from science for God is fine tuning. This is not just um, this is not just for life, but for existence at all. Very, very necessary. The universe, along with all of its laws and constants and conditions, is perfect for supporting life at all, and in particular upon this planet. We also know that if any of the numbers related to gravitational force, radiation, reaction rates, and chemicals, if any of those things were altered by even a fraction of a percent, life would be impossible. So many things had to be just perfect for us to be able to exist here.
Absolutely. And, I think fine tuning is one of the best things to point to, because it's really hard to deny. Some will try. They'll say, "Oh, you think we live in a fine-tuned universe?" And they'll point out all these things that exist, and they're like, "Oh, well, why? If we're in a fine-tuned universe, why do black holes exist? If we're in a fine-tuned universe, why do, it's like they'll throw out these crazy things about, destruction and say, "How is that fine-tuned?" It's like, well, that doesn't deny any of the actual fine-tuned evidence we have of reality. That doesn't.
Those things necessarily exist because the universe is fine-tuned.
Yeah, those issues are not issues that actually debunk your claim. So, moving into cosmology. So modern cosmology concludes that the universe had a beginning, right? So we can all agree that is the theistic and atheistic view, is that the universe did have a beginning. Something started this whole thing. But because things like the second law of thermodynamics, so, it's stating that everything that was set into motion, right? There was a beginning amount of energy, and that amount of energy is decreasing over time. Chase, did I explain that well?
Yeah. So entropy.
Yeah. There is a cost that is being exerted over time.
Right.
Anything that has a beginning must have a cause, right? You have to go back to it's the basic law, basic cause and effect. We can't have an effect if nothing caused it, right? That they go together. There had to be an uncaused cause, right? So the universe had to start, so a triggering event had to happen that had to start from somebody or somebody. Maybe we don't have to give definitives yet, but you have to agree something caused everything to start moving. An initial cause happened. That first domino, somebody had to tap the domino, or an earthquake had to trigger the dominoes, right? But something had to happen. And if you're trying to say it's a Big Bang, again, in the earthquake argument idea I just gave, something had to still create wherever that came from. Something had to create the motion.
The Big Bang is not a cause. The Big Bang is an effect.
Absolutely. Now, and again, we would just say God is the mover. God is the first cause that triggers all the causes that come from, right? All the effects that happen after were triggered by an intelligent creator, who had full intentions, paid attention to detail, created unique systems for life to exist and have possibility of expansion. He said to be fruitful and multiply, and covered the earth, right? And so he created an earth that was habitable, fully habitable. And so, yeah, and not just for human beings to exist, but to thrive. So, yes, next one.
Yeah, I'd also, to define entropy, entropy is the idea that energy is either perfectly preserved or is lost. There is no such thing as gaining energy. Energy exists, and there's a usable amount of it. It is created or changed in form, used, and then is lost. Now, for things like fire, right? If I light a piece of wood on fire, the fire burns up the wood, it is ash, and then it goes into the ground, and that is then used as energy for other stuff, right? So there is some sort of preservation of energy, but is largely lost, right? That energy is gone. Or if we use the fire to create steam, to turn a turbine, to make electricity, right? We're just changing forms of energy until we get to the usable form that will then just be used and disposed of. It's not getting back. So that's how we know that the universe cannot be eternal, is because if it were eternal, we would have already run out of usable energy by now. So that's that. DNA, a very potent argument, in my opinion, for theism. One of my favorites. So if you're unfamiliar, DNA is well, I'm sure you're all fairly familiar with what DNA is, but it is made up of small little nucleotides, which are known as the letters of DNA. So billions of these letters or nucleotides flow together to form usable information that is then decoded to form the proteins needed for life. This kind of complex information is not seen in nature to spawn out of unguided processes, right? Mountains didn't invent languages of DNA that then create little mountain people, right? We don't see that happening. Therefore, it is logical to conclude that the language of DNA and the language of the universe in general, including the laws and that govern everything, had to have been made by an intelligent creator. Information does not come out of non-information. That's not how that works either.
No.
So.
No, it does not. This is one that I was passionate about earlier, that our back and forth I landed on. So the laws of nature. The universe operates under consistent, intelligible laws that can be expressed mathematically. And this is to be expected if there is an omnipotent lawgiver. The existence of abstract concepts, such as numbers, is also a fun thought when it comes to the existence of God, because even if you can explain how everything came from nothing, how can you explain the existence of eternal, self-evident concepts like numbers and mathematical laws? And so, again, this is what I was talking about with how can you possibly explain there are governing laws that existed before the rest of existence came to be, that they pre-existed. Again, that's essentially assigning divinity to these natural laws, that they existed outside of time, outside of energy, outside of mass, outside of matter. That does not make sense unless there is a God. Then yes, all of those things can exist in pre-existence because they were in the mind of the creator. That the creator had already intended for these natural laws to exist and govern the universe that he created. Yes, that is absolutely possible. But it's not possible in naturalism. You cannot have pre-existent laws that were set in motion. Again, where did those get set in motion? Who placed the laws? Just the idea and concept of law comes from a lawgiver. It cannot come from nothing. There cannot be an invisible force that just exists, and within it, there just happen to be these abstracts that, we found because we were so intelligent as beings. We just found and hunted down these naturalistic sources. It's not possible. And so it is more reasonable that an intelligent creator created the universe and established these laws that cannot be broken. These are naturalistic laws that we literally can't break because they govern how the universe functions and operates. So it's nonsense to think otherwise.
True that. Yeah. To think about the eternal preexistence of numbers is pretty wild. If you can just think like numbers Yeah, there are things that would not be true had we not been created, right? Drew would not be drinking out of his red Solo cup right now, right? That's a thing that would not be true if he were not created. But numbers were true and always have been true and always will be true. That's just how numbers work. 1 + 1 will always equal 2. But a number is an abstract concept. One is not a thing, but a thought, a concept. And so the existence of concepts doesn't make a whole lot of sense when it comes to naturalism.
Yeah, numbers are they're an observed thing, right? Like we observe mathematics. It's not that it is fully abstract, because it's only one because we can see it and say this is a singular object. It's something we observe outside of, right? But it's again, it's an arbitrary thing that we attach to something. It's something that we have, but it exists no matter what. You're right. No matter what, these things will always exist. They will always mean this. We can't just create new math. That doesn't happen. It's more like we just find it.
Yes. So yeah, that is always very fun to think about for me is numbers, because numbers are not things, but they're also not completely they're also not completely, like, they're not far-fetched. So but they're true and they're real and you can understand them. You can't see them, but they do exist. But they're not a thing. They're a concept, and like, you just, the more you think about it, the more you're like, man, that's really something. That just doesn't happen.
No.
Probably the simplest answer that you can give to an atheist is the very simple theistic argument. Why is there something rather than nothing? There's no answer for that under atheism. Under atheism, there is nothing, and there will always be nothing. And it's funny because when asked, so I guess some atheists will say that the universe did have a beginning, but it will never have an ending. So, but it's like, okay, well, energy will have been used up. But then you can't, like, what does that even mean under atheism? And then if you say that things have an ending, how does that work? We have endings. I don't understand. So, why is there something rather than nothing? And I'm not even talking about space. Space is, by all measures, the thing. I'm talking about nothing. Like, no thing. Why is there something rather than nothing? It's not as though space always existed and then things came out of it. There was nothing. So I don't know.
Even the concept of nothing is very unfeasible. Like, we have no concept of, again, it's not just nothing in tangible space. It's nothing in the sense of time, energy, mass, matter. And that's what, when I try to explain this to people who hold this view that, you can explain everything this way, or even just explaining God with people, I'm like, you have to understand that your view of God is a God that's within the boundaries and borders of a created universe. That's not the Christian God. And that's the way all other gods are. Every other God is under the idea of a creation. The Christian God stands separate from his creation, because even saying the word his isn't accurate. He applies a pronoun to himself, but God is this essence that is completely outside of a created being. He is Father because of a title and status, but there's nothing we can attribute to God that is made. He is so separate from what has been made, and we have no fathomable way of comprehending that. It's not possible. And so it's like God cannot be made out of wood because he created wood. the creator of the thing cannot be made up of the thing, because if he's made up of the thing, then he didn't create it. It's just like him, right? Like, my parents technically created me, but you can say they created me. You can't say they created humanity, because they're human. They're also of a creation, right? So God isn't bound by time, by mass, by matter, by energy. Those all came into existence from him. He's not made up of any of them. How does that make sense? I don't know. It's not a way my mind can comprehend or compute, and that's okay. I think sometimes the problem is we think that everything has to be explained. And there are things that, as a Christian, I can look at and say, there's a gnat, I apologize. There are things I can look at and say, they just can't be explained. But in naturalism, the problem is you have to have an explanation for everything. In theism, you don't. And that's before we even get to Christianity, but especially in Christianity, you don't have to have an answer for everything. And it's okay. It doesn't make you an idiot. It doesn't make you, some dummy who is just lying to themselves. It's okay that things don't always have answers. Because there's some things that we just can't know. It's the same way with, like, the Trinity. We don't understand the Trinity. And I've argued this with people in Islam. I've argued this with people, with atheists. I've argued this with non-Trinitarian Christians. Just because something doesn't have an explainable answer that fits the narrative you want does not mean it's not true, right? Because if you can, again, non-Trinitarian Christians, if you can give me a great understanding of who God is outside of things that we use to explain God, which were all created by him, then maybe I'll bend a little bit in this view that the Trinity can't be explained, but I'll still believe in it. Because he can't explain to me God's essence and his presence and his nature, because we cannot fathom it. It's not something made from the made universe. So yeah, not, it's a ridiculous premise, that's just in denial.
Yea, verily.
Yeah, you want to close us out?
Yeah, so consciousness. This one is very, it's fairly new to me, not because I didn't think about it, but just because I never really looked into it. So the idea that the subjective experience of an individual seems to be inexplicable naturalistically is very apparent. Why I might have a different experience doing the exact same thing that Andrew does, even given the exact same conditions, is, it not consistent naturalistically. The mind seems to be wired more for more than just survival. As you can see, we're doing literally a talk about theology that you're probably watching on your phone, which is not necessary for survival, with headphones that are not necessary for survival. Like these things that we make and we invent and we have and we enjoy, these things are not necessary for really anything. We also possess real self-awareness that allows us not to just think about ourselves in general, but also our thoughts and reason about things that transcend ourselves. We don't see that in nature. And even if we did see that in nature, that would no way explain how that can come about naturalistically. I like we'll get into this a little bit next time with our morality argument, but the atheist cannot explain how morality comes about naturalistically. They'll say, oh, well, yeah, but like this kind of monkey. I remember one time I saw a scientist give an orange to one monkey and give nothing to the other, and the monkey like split it and gave one half to the other monkey. Like, okay, again, thank you. That is descriptive, but it's not prescriptive. It shows me that this stuff does happen in nature, but it does not explain to me why it should be that way. So that doesn't explain anything. So that's another reason. And then also, it may be easy, quote unquote, again, easy to explain certain things about the mind naturalistically, but things such as experience and abstract thought cannot be shown through pure materialism.
No.
There is no material of one, or there is no things such as beauty, or like these things just don't exist naturalistically, physically. Like you can't just say, oh, well, that's just your brain. It's so complicated. It works and all these different. Oh, science of the gaps again. All right, got it. Like we can't. You can't just be explaining these things away. They're very integral, and like I said, oftentimes they use descriptive instead of prescriptive arguments. That's like that's how it is. We know that. We need to know why it's that way, or why it should be that way. So. That's kind of the last one that I had prepared was consciousness. If you guys would like to know more about these different topics, I would highly suggest checking out Frank Turek. I'd highly suggest checking out Dr. William Lane Craig and Dr. John Lennox. There's also Reasoned Answers online. We got Cross-Examined, Lee Strobel, Josh and Sean McDowell. A lot of these different ones, they've done a lot of research into atheism and disproving it. I remember when I was a kid, that was kind of a bigger deal, was atheism. Or maybe it was just a bigger deal to me. I always thought it was pretty dumb. But dang it. And look, atheists are not dumb people. I have never argued that an atheist is an idiot. I mean, I may have said it once or twice out of frustration talking to an atheist or something like that, but I don't think that even people who disagree with us, I don't think any of you guys are idiots. I think you guys are special and talented and intelligent with real and actual experiences and the capacity to love and to know and to desire truth. You have to understand that this is a life or death situation when it comes to atheism, right? We see, we'll talk about this more next time, but with Pascal's wager, either Christianity is true and the atheist loses everything, or Christianity is false and the Christian doesn't lose anything, right? That's why this is so important. And that's why we're pushing these things really hard.
Right.
We love each and every atheist. And we know that the Lord Jesus does too. And we know that each and every single atheist who passes away is not an atheist for very much longer after that. So we want you guys to know that you can be right now.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, this is, again, we said this earlier, but the idea of the evangelizing atheist makes no sense because there's nothing to draw a person to it. And so, they always say, well, why are you shoving your faith down our throats? Why are you always so concerned with what we do? Let us live our lives. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You have the freedom and the right to live the way you want to live, and no one can take that away from you. The problem is, it is as if I am watching someone cross the road with earbuds in and they don't see or hear, and they're looking at their phone, earbuds are in, and they don't realize there's a car heading right towards them. Do I love you if I do nothing to stop it? If I don't try and get your attention, if I don't try and push you out of the way, if I don't try and flag the car down, whatever it may be, if I do nothing, can I ever say I loved you? Can I ever say I cared about you? No. In the same way, the Christian has a different perspective of what's coming. That there is an end. There is an afterlife. There is a place where there is a judgment to happen to every human being. And then different Christian groups argue about what hell is going to be like, but I guarantee you don't want to be there. And so at the end of the day, the Christian has a claim and a view that can produce hope, but in some it will also produce doom. That there is a coming day of judgment where all people will have to answer for the life they lived. And when it's held up to that standard of the 10 commandments, and you will have to say, which did you keep? Did you keep the whole law? Because you didn't want to be justified by the Son, and you rejected me, but all people will be held to the standard. Whether you accepted the standard or not does not mean you won't be held to it. So we have a reason, we have a purpose, but even outside of just heaven or hell, knowing there's a reality that you can experience true peace, true joy, true hope, where you can have rightness with God, where you can essentially be made whole. This idea that you can find this wholeness without Christ, it's just not true. You may think you have it, but there's a shallowness at the end of it that is often, like I said before, filled with materialistic things. You fill it with something. You create a God somewhere. You either, Paul tells us, you will either worship the Creator or you will worship the created. That there's no in between. Humans were made to worship something. Atheism worships science, right? Like you still have a God. You just don't want to call it God, but you have a God. If you believe the laws of nature existed outside of existence, that's your God, because that's the only thing that could possibly be. So we don't push our faith just because, right? We push our faith because we care, because we want you to know that there is such a greater reality out there outside of this nihilistic understanding of death and this void of darkness and nothing. There is something greater than that in the person of Christ. And he loves you. He cares about you. He wants you to have, him. But I don't know. We can't force it. So.
No, we cannot. Well,
so
that's about all I had to say.
Yeah. Our next episode is going to be covering part 2 of atheism. We'll be covering the moral argument. We will cover objective morality. So come back next week to see that. And if you have a disagreement with us, feel free, put it in the comments. We were happy to respond. If you have,
we know you will.
If you have questions or there's something you want us to talk about in our next video, put that in the comments. Or if you're just somebody who subscribes to us and wants us to talk about a specific issue after we're done with atheism, put that in the comments too. And we'll always consider, that for future episodes. So yeah. If you made it this far, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. It helps us out tremendously to get the gospel to more people. And I think that's it. So, hey, have a great day.
True that. See you guys.